if we go back up to 6, I mean, if you think about it, ultimately, the philosophy that Britain had about their relationship with the colonists is going to violate the colonial notion of natural rights and the consent of the governed. Now, if you think about it, we said that, in 1761, James Otis went to court in Boston, and there he challenged the authority of the government of Massachusetts Bay to issue writs of assistance, right? I mean, I don't know if you remember that. You might have, because I was all excited about it. I was all excited. And I remember we said that John Adams, 50 years later, who was there in the courtroom on that day, said that right then and there the child liberty was born. And the reason that Adams said that is because what Otis argued is that the writs of assistance were a violation of the colonists' natural rights, right? These are violations of our rights. Later, taxation is considered. Taxation without representation is a violation of our natural rights. Now, all of those actions on the part of Britain kind of fall under the category number 6, mercantilism. Because Britain viewed the colonies in colonial America as a part of an imperial system that was defined by mercantilism. Now, we said this before, no one ever remembers it. But what was the ultimate objective of mercantilism? The ultimate objective, yes?
To benefit the mother country.
So the idea of mercantilism is that the economy of the empire would be regulated by the government of the empire for the good of the empire. Now, if things were going well, what would be happening? What is good? Yes. A favorable balance of trade. So it would promote a favorable balance of trade. So the idea of mercantilism is that England would pass laws that would promote a favorable balance of trade, meaning that the empire would export a lot and import a little. And what this generally meant is that the colonies would be doing things that the mother country could not do for themselves. And what it even further meant is that the colonies would be limited into what they could do and whom they could buy from. And that was the case in colonial America. What was the name of the legislation that we said that enforced mercantilism? Richard, you're on fire, my friend.
Navigation Act.
Yes, the Navigation Acts, which were loosely enforced until after what war? I mean, the Navigation Acts were loosely enforced, the Sean Whelan Memorial Salutary Neglect, until after what war? Yes? The 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War, which ended in what year? Not that dates are important. 1763. With what treaty? The Treaty of Paris, 1763. What was the significant thing about the Treaty of Paris, 1763? We said, okay, the French and Indian War ends, the Treaty of Paris, 1763, ends that war, and there is a significant term of that treaty. Yes?
France gives up Ukraine.
Yes, France gives up their entire North American empire to England. Now, remember, in the aftermath of that war, England now has an enormous empire and is badly in debt because of that war. And so what does it do? It tries to tighten up on mercantilistic legislation in order to control that empire and to finance its debt. By doing that, what do colonial Americans say? Your actions, whether it be with the writs of assistance, whether it be with taxation, whether it be with the stationings of troops, or trying to regulate trade, or the proclamation line of 1763, your actions collectively violate our rights. Hence, eventually, what do colonial Americans decide? No longer do we consent to your authority because you are violating our natural rights. You're not protecting them. So we choose to replace your government with one that protects our natural rights. Now they make that argument in something called the Declaration of Independence. Now if we go to term 9, this is the response that Britain gives to the colonial argument that, their collective actions, in particular taxation, had violated the colonists' natural rights. Their response was, look, if you say that Parliament can't tax you without your consent, you are represented by Parliament, because every member of the British Empire is represented by every member of Parliament, and they call that virtual representation. Now, the term 8, gentry, I don't know, they must have come from somewhere, but I guess the only reason that I put it on in that area is because in Virginia in particular, the people who were the most adamant in sort of supporting the cause of independence were part of what were called the Tidewater gentry. Washington, Jefferson, Monroe, Madison, Patrick Henry, these leaders in Virginia, which was the largest and the most important colony, and the most prosperous colony for Britain, were part of the Tidewater gentry, which interestingly enough, it could raise some interesting questions. Why would the people like Washington and Jefferson, who had something to lose, support a cause like the Revolution? Now, remember before, when we were doing this in class, once we got to the Declaration of Independence, we kind of said, okay, once the Declaration of Independence was approved and announced, then everybody in America had to choose whether or not they were going to support the Revolution or not. And we said that, remember, John Adams' estimation was a third of the people in the country supported independence, a third of the people opposed independence, and a third of the people didn't care. That was not scientific. Most people suggest that only about 20% of the colonial population were actively loyalists. In other words, they supported or they opposed independence and supported the king and supported the British government. They were also called Tories. Now, one of the interesting things is that we typically said that the Tories and the Loyalists tended to be people with money. They tended to be people that had something to lose, with the exception of the Tidewater gentry, which were the rich in Virginia but did not support independence. They were patriots, right? Which is kind of interesting. And it's probably because some of the actions of mercantilism hurt the Tidewater gentry, and ultimately, I think anyone that supported independence did so because they thought they would be better off independent than as a part of the British Empire. Whether it was in restricting their rights or constricting them in terms of economic opportunity or whatever reason. And the people who were loyalists tended to think the other way. Now, sort of the revolution, we talked about, we went through the revolution in class, and we went through it in a review session, right? And, we got to the aftermath of the revolution. In the aftermath of the revolution, then the challenge, and we've talked about this numerous times, was to mold a society and a government that would be consistent with the ideology of the revolution. Now, one thing that is true, that the revolution unleashed revolutionary ideas. Ideas of independence, ideas of liberty, ideas of equality, which was inconsistent with the social class and stratification of colonial America. There were rich people, there were poor people, there were better people, there were not as good people. When we say better people, there was an acknowledgement of some people being better than other people. To some extent, the revolution assaults that. One of the things the AP likes to do is they like to talk about how events affect the social fabric. They call that term, how did the revolution affect the social fabric? And one of the biggest elements of the social fabric is class. Did some event, assault class distinctions? Certainly another part is culture. Did some event advance culture? So those are things that you may consider in terms of the revolution. But we want to quickly go on to term 10, privateer. Now, a privateer, as you can see, and again, I have kind of no idea why I put that there. I think I probably put it there because of the Revolutionary War. during wars,